Hey all, back around 2004, I think it was, there was a movie that came out, a documentary actually, called The Bridge. And without getting into too much detail about The Bridge, it was a movie about suicide from the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. And the footage from the movie was quite unsettling, to the point that several months later, when I had a chance to finally be on the Golden Gate Bridge, I walked across it, and I remember not feeling so much in awe of the beauty of this bridge and, of course, the beauty of the Bay Area, but this strange, macabre feeling that this thing that I walked over was a sacred ground with so much sadness that had happened. Since the Golden Gate Bridge was built, I'm not sure how many, but probably about 100 or so people have leapt from it down to the bay, which is for most people a death sentence. I don't know how high up from the water the Golden Gate Bridge is, but it's certainly enough to do the trick for the person who jumps, and it's quite sad. I live not even a football field's length away from the Hudson River, and I love the Hudson River Valley, and I have lost count, but I think there's probably something like a dozen bridges between Albany and New York City that cross the Hudson River, east-west, west-east. And I know I'm not going to remember them all, but heading southward, there's a few that are really quite striking. There's the Bear Mountain Bridge, which connects Rockland and Putnam counties. There's the Mid-Hudson Bridge, which crosses from Poughkeepsie over to Ulster County. Of course, there's the George Washington Bridge, which connects New Jersey to Manhattan. And here where I live in Castleton, there's a less striking bridge, but nevertheless a very busy bridge, and certainly a very high-up bridge. It's called the Castleton Thruway Spur Bridge. I can't remember what it's called. But there is a bridge that has a particular significance to me, or at least to my family, and that is the Rip Van Winkle Bridge, which connects an area just south of Hudson, New York, to the city of Catskill on the west side of the Hudson River. I've been across this bridge hundreds of times, probably. My wife, in fact, used to cross it every day to work. It offers a pretty nice view of the Hudson River, just as most of these bridges do. It has a pedestrian walkway, and it's really quite nice, particularly if you're not there when the wind is blowing. But I want to share with you why there's some significance to this bridge and some photos that I have taken of it. Back in November, I took my boys out for the day just to get them out of the house on one of the last clear warm days of autumn. And I decided to bring them to the Rip Van Winkle Bridge to walk across on the pedestrian walkway. I have a 6-year-old and I have a 2.5-year-old. And for them, it was just an interesting walk. And during that day, I remember I was feeling depressed, sad, not about the bridge, but about other things going on. And I remember saying a prayer to my guardian angel, and just, I don't know if it was a prayer of gratitude or a prayer of asking for something, but it was a prayer to my guardian angel. And when I ended up on the bridge and I walked across from the east bank to the west bank, it became obvious to me that there was some significance to this bridge, and perhaps to why I was there that day. And it brought me back to a story that I heard told about my aunt from the 1970s. Now, I don't have many memories of my aunt. She passed away when I was a little boy back in the 80s. But there was a story that my mother told me, and one of her daughters has filled in for me, which was that my aunt, who really had a very kind heart, had performed an act that was almost like being somebody's guardian angel. It apparently was a hot evening in summer, and my grandmother and my aunt and some of her children decided to go and buy some ice cream across the river near Hudson. They lived near Catskill at the time. And as they were driving back, my aunt, who apparently had just a very big heart, she noticed a man on the bridge looking over the railing. And I don't know if at the time there was a pedestrian bridge over there, a pedestrian walkway, but other cars had passed him by, but my aunt took notice of him. And she stopped her car, and she got out, and she approached this man. And the story goes that he was hanging out, looking over the railing, and then began to attempt to scale the railing, which would lead to a drop of certainly over 100 feet down to the Hudson River. It's a nearly, probably almost always fatal fall. And my aunt, having approached him, asked him why he was going to do such a thing. And he told her he was so despondent because his wife had left him, and she had taken their children, and he didn't know where they were. The man was an insurance salesman, I believe, and despite his contacts that he had, he couldn't track his wife and his children. And he told my aunt that he was ready to die. And my aunt, having this big heart, she grabbed his leg or his arm or some appendage, and she told him, "Look, I'm a mother of 4 children, and if you go over this railing, then I go over this railing. And then it's not simply your death on your conscience, but my death on your conscience, and my children will grow up without a mother." Suffice it to say, what she said had some impact on this man, because he decided to let go and put his feet back down onto the pavement. And my grandmother, who was a somewhat a salty woman, she said, "Hurry up, make your decision, our ice cream is melting," something along those lines. But my aunt, she didn't rush this man. She listened to him, and she was very empathetic to him, talked him away from killing himself, away from jumping into the Hudson River. And it occurred to me when I was on that bridge with my boys, on the other side, sitting near where the tolls were, near where there's a little park where you can view the span, that despite the fact that I think my guardian angel heard my prayer, in a way I needed to be reminded of that story about my aunt, about her angelic act of kindness. And one other thing that I want to add to this story is that my aunt died about 10 years later after this incident on the bridge. She had had cancer for over a decade. And my mother told me that at my aunt's wake, and I don't remember any of this because I was too young, but she was approached by a man who she had never met before. And the man signed the book at my aunt's wake. And when my mother asked him who he was, he asked her, "Do you remember any story about a man that your sister saved from the Rip Van Winkle Bridge?" Of course, my mother was somewhat aware of it. And the man said something to my mother that if it wasn't for my aunt on that summer evening or late summer afternoon, he would have been dead. And that he never would have seen his kids again, because he did eventually end up getting custody of his children again. I don't know much more about the story than that, but it does bear out something, that a act of kindness is angelic, an act of sacrifice, the way my aunt was willing to take the time and help this man. It's something angelic-like. And I remember that afternoon in November of this year just thinking, wow, in a way my prayer was answered, because as bad as I feel, and I certainly wasn't thinking about plunging off the bridge, especially with my kids there, there's a lot of good in the world. And I think that my late aunt was, what she did right there on that day was an embodiment of it. Well, thank you very much for letting me share with you these photos and this story. God bless you.